To draw the arteries of the upper limb, we start by drawing the main branch running down the upper limb here. As a note, we're working here only with the right upper limb on the anterior side. The main artery running through the upper limb is going to change names at a couple different distinct landmarks. Up at the very beginning, our first artery here is the subclavian artery. Our second sequence here, occupying the armpit, is the axillary artery. And past the axillary artery, we become the brachial artery until the brachial artery ends when it splits. The subclavian artery becomes the axillary artery when it crosses the first rib. The axillary artery becomes the brachial artery when it crosses the teres major muscle at its inferior margin, which I wrote incorrectly, so I'm fixing it now. Boom. The brachial artery will split near the elbow joint to form the ulnar artery on the medial side and the radial artery on the lateral side. These are the main arteries of the upper limb. Now we can start adding in our branches. There's one branch of the subclavian artery that's going to be relevant to the upper limb, and that is the thyrocervical trunk. The axillary artery running between the first rib and teres major can be split into 3 separate parts. Those 3 parts are defined by the edges of the pectoralis minor muscle, which runs just anterior to the axillary artery. There's one branch in the first part of the axillary artery, and that is going to be the superior thoracic artery. There are 2 branches in the second part of the axillary artery, the first of which has a bunch of small branches. The second actually doesn't, and I mistakenly drew branching there. That first branch is going to be the thoracoacromial artery. And thoracoacromial has a bunch of small branches, but the most important one here will be that pectoral branch. The second branch here is the lateral thoracic artery. Just past pectoralis minor in the third part of the axillary artery, our first branch here is the subscapular artery. At about the same level as subscapular, but coming off the other side of the artery, we have a pair of arteries that will wrap around the humerus. These are going to be the anterior and posterior circumflex humeral arteries. And those are all our branches of axillary artery. Now we move past teres major into the brachial artery. Our first branch of the brachial artery goes posterior to the humerus, down until it splits. This artery is the profunda brachii artery. It's also known as the deep brachial artery. After it splits, the artery that continues down is the radial collateral artery. On the medial side, an artery branches directly off the brachial artery. This one is the ulnar collateral artery. There's actually 2 here, both a superior and an inferior, but I've only drawn one. The ulnar collateral artery and radial collateral artery both anastomose with arteries coming from the inferior side. On the lateral side, coming from the radial artery is the radial recurrent artery. On the medial side, coming from the ulnar artery is the ulnar recurrent artery. There are actually 2 of these arteries again. These will be both anterior and posterior ulnar recurrent arteries. There's a pattern here around the elbow where we can see on the medial side, we're both called ulnar. On the lateral side, we're both called radial. Above the elbow, they are both collateral arteries, and inferior to the elbow, they are both recurrent arteries. There is an additional branch of the ulnar artery that is pretty short and then branched into 2. That very first short branch is going to be called the common interosseous artery. Its 2 branches are going to go directly on either side of the interosseous membrane. So these are going to be the anterior and posterior interosseous arteries. Once we get past the wrist into the hand, the radial and ulnar arteries both form arches. These arches do anastomose with the artery on the other side. And right about here, I realized I'm out of frame, so let me adjust. There we go. Okay. We have a branch coming mainly from the radial artery and then anastomosing with the ulnar artery, and then another branch coming from the ulnar artery and anastomosing on the radial artery. This branch coming from the ulnar artery is more superficial and is known as the superficial palmar arch. The branch coming from the radial artery is deeper and is known as the deep palmar arch. Branching off of the palmar arteries are going to be arteries going into the fingers. These are the digital arteries, but I haven't drawn them here. And that is our complete diagram of the upper limb.